This is,
There's a
this
lot
is,
of footage.
oh my goodness me.
That's
This is where,
that's the all that's standing of the Twin Towers right now in the background. That's all that's standing. That's it. That's all that's left.
so you're literally right inside. What time did you actually
I
photograph?
don't even know. That was actually, I rode my motorcycle right up from there. That was about an hour ago, not even.
And this is right at the center of where the trade towers
there.
stood
You can
until...
see, like, when you see the firemen, there's nothing they can do. It's just like amazing.
You must have been frightened at the very least to be there.
I mean, I was just thinking to myself what a powerful act of ignorance it was, really. It's amazing.
And this is the building
I couldn't believe
adjacent
it.
to...
That's the Twin Tower. That was
Right.
the Twin Tower. That was the other tower. And then we went up more into there.
You know, I just thought to myself I can smell it, but in fact what I can do is smell your shirt.
Yeah.
You've brought the smell of just disaster with you on your T-shirt. Were there other people in there? I don't see anybody sort of, you know.
No, I was with one other person I ran into there who actually somebody I know, and he was photographing as well. And it was just us two, and then the firemen. It's funny, I ran into my friend right there who's also taking pictures. He should be somewhere. They probably edited him out.
It's absolutely...
Look at that. That's all that's left.
Do you know whether that's the South Tower or the North Tower?
That's the South Tower.
And you saw no sign of life in here whatsoever?
No, I went all the way right there. Like, I don't know if they edited it out yet, but there's a big hole going down to the ground. There's nobody. And then we ran into somebody else and said they haven't seen anybody. Nobody. But the firemen said, you know, that there's been a lot of people dead, like a lot of firemen died.
Because there were firemen in the building at the time trying to help people evacuate from the building.
Yeah, they said 200 people died. I thought the fireman I saw too said 200 people died already.
And this wall here, this is from part of the tower itself?
Yeah, that's the South Tower, the lobby. And it's all the smoke and there's still fire going on in there right now.
Are you walking across?
Yeah, see, that's
you're walking
the
across,
person.
and that's your
Yeah.
friend also with a photograph. And the building on the right that occasionally appears is a building adjacent?
Yeah, and it's just gouged. Like the parts of the Twin Tower just gouged out the building. See, that's the concourse below. That's going down like 20 feet or so. But that's the part that's crazy. It's just that's all that's left. So.
Did you hear anything while you were in there?
Just like cracklings and pops and stuff. See, that's the guy who's been looking for his friends, and he didn't find anybody either.
And do we know who this person is?
No, he was speaking Russian.
Really, looking through the devastation. And this now is what?
This is a party actually. So.
Last night?
No, it's a while ago, but.
Where was the party?
That was in PS1.
Oh, so you just simply decided to go in there to see what you could photograph?
Yeah, I wanted to because it's funny because the name of my magazine is Prophecy, and we had just shot the Twin Towers last night. My photographer Amy had just been shooting it with the 4x5 format last night, and I hadn't spoken to her yet. And then my friend called me this morning and said, "Did you hear what happened?" And I said, "No." And then so I went to, like I said, I went to the city to see Amy because I couldn't reach her. All the phones were down. And so I went right to the site.
Were you doing a feature on the Twin Towers? Were you?
Well, basically, I was photographing the Twin Towers for the power of the Twin Towers, architecturally, and like metaphorically, what they stood for. Then these people wanted to destroy them. I was kind of, I was observing them more. We have been shooting it for over a week.
Really, and it's ended in this vulnerable place.
Yeah.
Can I just get one other thing clear? You managed to get right onto the site itself, right onto the top of one of the two towers.
Right.
But I couldn't see any police, I couldn't see any fire department.
Well, they were all back there. I went right into it. They were all like just around it.
Did you have any sense when you were walking on it that it was too dangerous to be on?
No. Well, they were when we first started walking in, the fire people were like, "No, don't go," but we just went in.
And you
we wanted to see.
And you never heard a sound except the sound of
Yeah, there was no people,
firecrackers.
there was no nothing. There was just glass breaking and stuff like that.
Well, Kevin, thank you for this. Kevin Suddaby, he's a publisher of a magazine called Prophecy, and thanks very much, Kevin, for coming. Anything else you can think of? Just.
I mean, I just wanted to say I think that it's a powerful act of ignorance at the end of the day, because this country is so full with so many different types of people, and I can understand, you know, people and their frustrations with capitalism and other, just capitalism. I can understand people's frustration, but to do that type of destruction to people they don't even know, it's just, like I said, it's powerful. I understand they're trying to get a message across, but it's also powerfully ignorant, in my opinion. That's all I can say. That's all I want to say.
I think it's a thing that I think it's a thing that many people in the country agree with today. That it was an act of terror and an act of ignorance, and which the government has said repeatedly today it'll try to get to the bottom of, but nobody's very hopeful about that.
I mean, it's obvious that that there needs to be a better dialogue between, you know, these people and what they need done, and what we're doing, and they're bringing the field to a whole nother level. But like I said, I understand to an extent, but it needs to go further than what they're doing.
Well, we're grateful as a news organization that you decided to bring that video in here. Thanks very much, Kevin Suddaby, because it gives us the closest, the most intimate sense we have seen yet of what it is like at ground zero in terms of the building collapsing in on itself. And I think that George Stephanopoulos can add to the status of the building, and also, George, to the current police activity. Weren't you a bit surprised to see nobody in there besides young Mr. Suddaby?
Nobody at all. It really was surprising, although it did accord with what we had heard earlier, Peter, and now we've just heard from one of our reporters, Lucy Kerrigan, who's gotten quite close, that the police are actually pulling back from the scene right now. The police and other rescue personnel are pulling back from the scene because they're concerned about two things. Number one, all of the asbestos in the air coming out from that smoke from the collapsing building, and secondly, the possibility of other buildings collapsing in the area. So they've actually pulled away now from ground zero, if you will. Secondly, Peter, another grim note. We have now heard that Chelsea Piers, which is a large, several block long athletic complex over here on the west side at 17th Street and 11th Avenue, has now been turned into a temporary hospital and morgue here in Manhattan. It's the first temporary hospital and morgue that's been set up. There are now 30 ambulances operating out of there, and that will be one of the major sites here on the Lower West Side.
Thanks very much, George. Actually, we're now looking at some more footage that Kevin Suddaby's taking. Kevin, just tell us where this is. What is this?
This is on the West End Highway, and I can't remember the other street. You can't tell this. You really can't tell, but it's right there where the South Tower was, where the Marriott was.
The Marriott Hotel, yeah. The Marriott Hotel headquarters there, and you're still focused very much on the trade towers itself.
Yeah, and on the rubble, it's just amazing. The cars, the ambulances are all crushed. Lights are still going. Horns are still being, are still blowing.
Did you pick up there was some sense of activity here, that there was some sense of purpose, or just people overwhelmed by what had happened?
You mean the fire department?
Fire department, the police,
There's nothing they could do. They said that there were already 200 firemen dead. They were just, it was futile. They said it's bigger than there's not enough people. There's just a handful of people there.
Because so many firemen were working to get other people out when this actually happened.
I mean, you need an army of people to
and of course, the city will have an army of people before long, because the National Guard is coming in. It's very interesting what the mayor said some time ago. He said people need relief, desperately want relief. At the same time, they don't want relief because they don't want to leave the job they are doing, because in many cases they are looking for and or supporting their friends and the colleagues. And that's a bit of a review there of some of the material that Kevin Suddaby shot earlier, and which we're very glad to have. I'm just looking at one more report from our foreign desk here this morning, that a KAL plane, Chuck Lustig, a KAL plane, KAL, you mean the Korean Airlines plane? Thanks very much. A Korean Airlines plane was forced down by U.S. and Canadian forces over White Horse Bay in Canada earlier today. The Canadian television reports that forces on the ground stormed the plane, and we have no other details at this time. But there's another aberrant incident today happening in Canada. U.S. military throughout the world, we've said before, are on the highest state of alert. So from what's spread out from here has just been quite extraordinary in terms of putting everybody in the world. Most U.S. military forces on threat condition Delta, which is the highest condition that the highest alert the military can be on. But as any number of people have reported today, any notion that the U.S. was invincible died in this rubble. Listening to some of the politicians talk today, Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska, where the president is at the moment, said America is forever changed and America's in for a long fight, which I think people in the fight against terrorism understand and have understood for a very long time. But somebody else said this is a huge wake-up call for the United States. Both former Secretary of State Baker and I think the former director of the CIA said that there was just not enough human intelligence on behalf of the United States in these organizations and cells around the world. John McWethy, our Pentagon correspondent, has just come from a Pentagon briefing, and so we'll pick you up, John. John, yeah, what are you hearing?
Peter, one of the things they wanted to do and do very publicly is to deal with the rumor that had been circulating for several hours that the fourth civilian jetliner that was hijacked was shot down by American aircraft. They are denying that flatly. They say it is absolutely not true, Peter.
John, I apologize. I was distracted, and so for the benefit of anybody else who was distracted of me, do you mind repeating that? I'm sorry.
They are denying the rumor that had been circulating for several hours that the U.S. military shot down one of the civilian jetliners. They're saying that is absolutely not true.
Okay, thank you, John. You caught me off balance because, in fact, I'd never heard the rumor in the first place, and not heard the report whatsoever. Now, you've been in a briefing. What else did you hear?
Well, they're not saying a whole heck of a lot. What they are saying is that they now have accounted for the presence of all of the Joint Chiefs, the service secretaries, and of course the Secretary of Defense. Those are people who have been accounted for. What we are now learning is that a new part of the Pentagon that has just been occupied was one of the areas that was terribly hit. We believe there are going to be quite a few casualties from the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps in particular, as well as the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Do you have any idea what quite a number of casualties means?
No idea whatsoever, Peter. You consider the density in the Pentagon. There are 20 to 24,000 people that work there. It took out one huge slice of it. So you have to do your own arithmetic. If you look at the size of the gash over my shoulder, you have to believe that there are many, many hundreds of people who died.
And what have the briefers had to say this afternoon, John, about the state of alert in the world generally, with all U.S. forces on such a state of alert? I'm sorry, before you go to that, we're just looking at a picture which gives us, I think, the best view yet, if this is an accurate drawing, of what the degree of damage or penetration of the plane will have been to the Pentagon. I'm not sure that's absolutely accurate, but by the way, ABC's Ann Compton tells us the president may be on the move again, and ABC's Charlie Gibson has information as well. Charlie?
Well, Peter, there's going to be hundreds, I guess, and we don't know the number of personal stories that are going to come out of this. People who have died in the World Trade Center or at the Pentagon or on the airplanes that were hijacked and crashed in various places. We now understand the wife of Ted Olson. He is the Solicitor General of the United States. America came to know him because he's the man who argued the president's case in front of the Supreme Court, George W. Bush's case in front of the Supreme Court. He was not yet president when the case of the Florida election was being disputed before the Supreme Court. Ted Olson's wife, Barbara, who is a former federal prosecutor herself, she was on the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. We had heard this from friends of the family. Regrettably, it has now been confirmed. She apparently was able to make a phone call to her husband, the Solicitor General, Ted Olson, and tell him they were being hijacked, that all of those on board the plane, that is American Airlines Flight 77, that had taken off from Dulles Airport heading for Los Angeles this morning, a 757, that had 64 people aboard. All of the passengers had been herded into the back of the plane. She was able to get a call out saying they were in the process of being hijacked, and then shortly after that, the plane crashed into the Pentagon. She was herself, as I say, a former federal prosecutor. She had also become familiar, I think, to many in the viewing audience of television as a commentator recently over the situation of Gary Condit. Indeed, I'd had a chance to talk with her a couple of times on Good Morning America just in the past couple of weeks. So we're going to hear hundreds of these stories of people who were killed in the various venues that were affected today. But this one obviously is very painful, the wife of the Solicitor General of the United States. Peter.
Thanks very much, Charlie. And I think in the whole day, this is the first name we've had of anybody who's died. The first name, the first personality. I mean, to hundreds and thousands of families around the country, the names and personalities are all familiar. People they fear are in trouble, who know they're in trouble, who've been confirmed they're in trouble. The desperation of people at at a distance from people in trouble is just a horrendous thing to report. But I believe that's the first name we've had all day of being able to identify somebody. Barbara Olson, who, as Charlie says, was very often on television, the wife of the Solicitor General, Ted Olson, who died in the suicide attack on the Pentagon. John McCarthy, you still there?
It's Peter.
Yeah. John, come back to the briefing, if you would. I'm not sure we've heard everything from you on the briefing itself.
They just are expressing their frustration and at the difficulty of getting rescue workers inside the Pentagon, Peter. Part of the building is still on fire, and the fire is moving to sections of the Pentagon along roofs and along various pipes. So they're having a real difficulty getting in there even to search for bodies at this early time. That is what they are focused on at this point. I will tell you, Peter, that Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, and most of the chiefs have been in the National Military Command Center all day since this terrorist strike. And you have to leave it up to your own imagination, the kinds of things that they are contemplating in their hours after the strike.
Okay, John, thank you very much indeed. John McCarthy, who's been at the Pentagon all day and was in the other side of the Pentagon when this aircraft was crashed into the Pentagon today. We now know, with all of the passengers on board, at least in this one phone call herded to the back of the plane, who went from being passengers to hostages in a matter of seconds and minutes. And John, who was working on the other side of the Pentagon, has said a couple of times that just on the other side of the Pentagon, you just felt this huge, just knew exactly that something had gone by. And when he first described the width of the gash and the height of the gash, 6 stories high, 200 feet wide, which you can't appreciate on television, quite frankly, as much as you think you can. And we've had several reports in from Martha Raddatz at the State Department, which I think most of them we've had on the air so far, which was the State Department ordered U.S. embassies around the world to close for the day, but it's up to the individual embassy, given the situation that they think is appropriate in their region. Many have closed for the day. Secretary of State Powell, who's been in Colombia, is on his way home tonight, but we do not know actually where he is at the moment. I told you just a moment ago that Ann Compton, who's been with President Bush all day, believes that he is on the move, or they are on the move again, and one can only believe, I shouldn't say that, didn't think they were going to go to Nebraska. We can only imagine that there's this pressure to get the president back to the nation's capital. And the State Department was evacuated at the time. There's actually been a worldwide caution about terrorist activity out and about universally since the 7th of September. But it had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with what happened in New York City and in Washington today, and what potentially happened, we're told, at Camp David, based on the information from one passenger who called 911 from the United Airlines that crashed near Johnstown, which said that they were headed in the direction of Camp David. The New York Stock Exchange and the American Stock Exchange have both announced that they will not trade tomorrow, and they will make a decision tomorrow on when trading will resume. The country has, in many ways, come to a halt. Not completely by any means, because every politician has spoken and had a chance to speak today has made the point that if you change too much in the country, you're doing exactly what the terrorists and their allies would like you to do. Linda Douglas on Capitol Hill. Linda.
Good afternoon. This is Maureen Bunyan with Del Walters at ABC7. We are showing you a live picture of the fire which is still going on at the Pentagon this afternoon. This is in the wake of this terrible, terrible terrorist incident early this morning. So far, there have not been accounts of all the personnel in the Pentagon. Rescue efforts of those who are injured and in that building still going on, as you can see. And just a little while ago, there was a briefing outside the Pentagon about the situation there. Let's show you what the Pentagon officials had to say.
Right now, they're still working on the fire. We have smoke throughout the building. We're fortunate in this part of the building in that the part of where the plane hit, one part of it was just beginning to be occupied. Areas had just been renovated. So part of it was occupied, but not all of it.
As I just told you, the Navy and the Marine Corps say that not everyone in the Pentagon has been accounted for so far. If you work in the Pentagon, they want you to call this toll-free number. That's for both civilian and military workers. Please call this number, 1-877-663-6772, and let the Pentagon officials know that you are all right and accounted for. Del?
And Maureen, we just received the special late edition of the Washington Post. The headline reads, "Terror hits Pentagon World Trade Center." We'll get a shot of it on camera 3 here. But that is the way that it is officially being recorded, history being recorded as of this day. Undoubtedly, this is one of those days where people will say, I was standing at such and such a place when it happened. We want to bring you up to date also on the number of injuries that are taking place. We have some graphics that we'll bring up on the screen. We are receiving reports that 31 injured parties have been taken to Virginia Hospital Center. Another 5 people are listed in critical condition at the Washington Hospital Center. George Washington Hospital has 2 people still in the emergency room at this point. Alexandria Inova Hospital, we are being told, has 10 people there. Actually, we are being told that is 14 people, 10 of them in fair condition, 1 in critical condition, and 3 in stable. Perhaps if there is any bright side to all of this so far, and I repeat, it is early, but so far we have received no word of any fatalities yet.
Yeah, thank you. We go back to ABC News with Peter Jennings right now, of course, but we'll have more for you on ABC7 News at 5 o'clock this evening.
Taken out of the city to a secret location. They hadn't just been moved down the street.
Yes, that's right. We have been told that they were taken out of the city. Helicopters came and picked them up on the ground, some of them. We don't know which ones got into the helicopters because it was just too far away for us to see, and took them out of Washington. But
Okay.
it could be to someplace very close.
Thanks very much, Linda Douglas. Going to go to Lynn Sherwin and talk about the aircraft involved today in just a minute. Before we do, just want to give you some other examples of how this has affected the country as a whole. The Emmys, which were going to be held in Los Angeles, the Latin Grammys, which were scheduled, their award ceremonies for tomorrow night, I think the Latin Grammys, have now canceled or postponed their particular celebrations. We told you earlier about some of the other examples, but aside from looking at that list on the screen itself, think of this. Aside from the work stoppages, this is the first time since D-Day in 1944 that organized baseball has wiped out a whole day of regular season play. First time since D-Day in 1944, the landing of the Allied forces on the beaches at Normandy, which led ultimately to the liberation of Europe from the Germans. It's the first time since 1944 that organized baseball has done that. And there were all of the television shows in New York City, which the David Letterman show, and others on CBS, which all get television audiences, popular audiences coming from around the country. They've all canceled their tapings. They'll be either in reruns tonight. This is true of the late night show on NBC. Malls across the country, some of you who live out around about the country, you all know this better than we do, but malls around the country simply locked their doors, and people couldn't go and shop in the malls today. It was this feeling that anywhere there were people gathered, that there was a measure of vulnerability which we had seen in New York City. Now, the mayor of New York City, Rudolph Giuliani, says at the moment that at least 2,100 people have been injured and 600 of them taken to hospitals, and that there are 15 100 walking wounded who have been taken to Liberty State Park, which is on the other side of the New York Harbor there, where the Hudson River meets the harbor. It may be live, but I'm not quite sure what you're looking at. Is this from the New Jersey side? This is from Liberty State Park, looking, I assume, across the New York Harbor at an earlier point today, because the smoke is not as thick now as it was. That's live. That's a live photograph, and that dark smoke is still coming from the trade tower itself. Thank you. As for the attack on the Pentagon, the Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington, Virginia, reports there have been as many 31 people injured there and admitted to the hospital, including 2 who are in surgery. and most other patients are in intensive care or being treated for smoke immolation. I'm joined by Tom Humphreys, but I don't know much more about you, Mr. Humphreys, than that. You were in the World Trade Center on the 57th floor.
Yes.
And you walked out.
Yes.
So take us from the beginning, would you?
Well, I was sitting at my desk working on a speech I was supposed to give this afternoon, and the building was rocked by an explosion. And
which tower were you in?
I was in Tower 1.
Right.
And the next thing I knew, I saw flaming debris cascading down the side of the building. And I was in the 93 bombing,
right.
And I knew this one was a lot worse. So we went out on the floor. And basically,
you worked for a business in the building?
I worked for a law firm in the building.
Right.
And basically went on the floor, tried to figure out what was going on, figure out whether we should evacuate or not. About 5 minutes into that, we decided that it was best to get out.
You were in the south. You were in the south tower.
We were in the north tower.
Sorry, in the north tower.
North tower,
right.
Which is One World Trade.
Right.
Decided that it was time to get out. Our office manager heard that the plane had been, that the building had been hit by an aircraft at the 90th floor. So we assumed that the problem was above us, and that we could evacuate, and that's what folks did.
Did you think at the moment that it was a terrorist attack? Did you think it was an accident? Did you have the vaguest idea?
I had some idea there was a bombing. Having been in the 93 incident, that kind of explosion just doesn't happen normally. I didn't know what it was. But when I heard there was a plane that hit, I thought that made some sense, and I thought that it was very unlikely that any kind of plane would hit the Trade Center accidentally, you know, on a clear day. So
was there how immediate, how deep was the concern in your colleagues and out on the common halls? Was there panic at all?
No, that's the one thing. What I found is no panic. People are concerned. People are a little apprehensive, and they want to know what to do. But both on the floor and then down the stairwell, there was no panic. And in fact, people were helping other people to an incredible degree.
Were the stairwells lighted?
Yes, this time they were. Last time they weren't. This time the stairwells were lighted. There was some smoke, but that was it wasn't nearly as bad.
Was there emergency lighting?
Yeah, there was. There was no other, you know, there were no fire or police personnel. At that point, you're on your own.
Now, you came down from the 57th floor. Were other people coming down from the floors above you and below you?
They were coming down from the floors above. There were some injured people that came down apparently from, you know, floors where this had happened. And so we saw them as well.
And how long did it take you to get out of the building?
You know, I estimate it took me 45 minutes or more to get out of the building.
And in the time that you were coming down, there was another aircraft hit the southern tower.
I was on the 44th floor trying to get down, and we heard another, you know, explosion. We didn't know what it was. We again saw flaming debris, and I now know that that's, you know, that was the second aircraft that hit.
I think you maybe know where I'm going. You were on the 90th floor. It took you 45 minutes.
57th
floor. There were people coming down from floors above you.
Right.
Is it your sense that in at least your tower, before the tower collapsed, everybody or a large number of percentage of people managed to be evacuated?
I think a lot of people got out. First of all, it was 8:45 in the morning, so that's relatively early by New York standards.
Right.
And then secondly, the first plane that hit, there was time to get out. I think even having said that, there were a lot of people still in that building, including the fire and police personnel, that were trying to come up. So, but my sense is that I know on our floor a lot of people got out.
And as you came down, were you joined by people on other floors? Is it a common evacuation passage down through the building?
Well, the problem was there was only one stairwell open. The other stairwells were blocked by smoke. And so you had one narrow stairwell, which is what led to the delay in the evacuation. And that's why it took so long to get out.
We've told people in the rest of the country fairly regularly, the 50,000 people who work in the two trade centers, and you say 8:45 in the morning is a little late for New York City.
Well, it's a little early.
Sorry, a little early.
Yeah.
Do you have a feeling that a lot of people hadn't gone into the building at this point today?
I know in our offices, we're a law firm, we start at 9:30, and a lot of people were not there yet. Some of the businesses which operate on an earlier schedule, I'm sure everybody was there.
Right.
But I think that the building wasn't as full as it could have been. If it had been 2 hours later, it would have been much worse.
And did you notice today as you went to work or as you came out that it was more sparsely populated?
It was about the same. I mean, it was about a normal day.
I must confess I'm amazed at how calm you are, having been through not only the 1993 bombing, but this, and walked down by yourself, and you seem perfectly calm.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Right.
So,
and how did people behave as you were evacuating?
People, I mean, that was, I saw it again 8 years ago, and I saw it today. People were incredibly calm, and they were helping other people. I fear that some of the people that were helping other people didn't make it out of that building because, they stayed behind, and fire personnel. But people, there was no panic that I saw. And in that environment, you have a narrow stairwell, a lot of people, you don't know what's going on. It's a recipe for disaster, and the people are very, very calm.
Could you tell at all, from your perspective on the 57th floor, that when the aircraft hits, which we think is about the 90th floor, at least in the very top part of the building, how many floors were actually damaged at the time, or did people talk at all about the degree of damage that had been done just by the plane hitting before the building collapsed?
It was a little hard to tell. You had some people coming down from the higher floors.
So people were able to get from the higher floors down through the damaged part of the building?
Well, that I don't know.
Okay.
My sense is that they came down from floors under 90 and were able to get down above 90. I don't know.
Okay.
I know that in Tower 2, I talked to someone from Tower 2, and they were able to get down from around the 88th floor. They were evacuating. When our tower was hit, they were evacuating, and then their tower was hit. And even so, they were able to get down because they were on the right side of the building.
Right.
So,
and were you there when first Tower 2 and then Tower 1 collapsed?
well, I just had exited the building, and I was out on Church Street, and the way I saw it, Tower 2 came down. The South Tower came down first, and I did see that, yeah.
And then I assume you ran.
I ran like hell.
Yeah, we've seen the video of people just running like hell in every direction to get as far away as possible.
And I think the tragedy is that the police and fire personnel that were trying to help people out of that building were right at ground zero when that happened. So you have to give them a lot of credit.
As somebody said, we've said several times today, when the folks is running one way, the police and the fire department are running the other way, trying to help. Anything else aside from your survival, which strikes you at this several hours after you went through this horrible experience?
Well, I mean, I think everybody in this country believes we've got to find the people that did it, and we've got to deal with them. And, I felt this way in 1993, and I think there is no stronger emotion. And, I'm sorry, but this cannot happen in this country.
Many thanks, Tom. Really appreciate you helping us to understand. That's Tom Humphreys, who works in a law firm in the Trade Tower. He was in the North Tower on the 57th floor, and he walked out, and you've heard his story. And ABC's Charlie Gibson has been trying to get a handle on some of the other stories which are similar. Charlie?
Well, Peter, we've been trying to keep track of the injury situation as it exists. Obviously, the numbers of those who have died today, it's going to be some time before we have any estimates, and properly people in New York and in Washington around the Pentagon are not commenting. They shouldn't, because we don't have any concept. But as you reported a few moments ago, Mayor Giuliani did talk about the numbers of injured, saying at least, and these are very rough numbers, at least 2,100 people injured, 600 taken to hospitals, 1,500 walking wounded, he said, many of whom have been evacuated to New Jersey's Liberty State Park, right across the river, the Hudson River, from where the World Trade Centers were. And we have some further reports. ABC's Cynthia McFadden, who has been down in that area all day long, says that a triage center has been set up on the Chelsea Piers in New York City. Now, the Chelsea Piers is not a hospital area at all. It's an area that used to be shipping piers along the Hudson River on Lower Manhattan, and is now used for recreational purposes. There are tennis courts and golf driving ranges and other things there, meeting rooms, that kind of thing. It's a commercial operation, but a triage center has been set up there, and 50 makeshift operating rooms are being prepped, and hundreds of ambulances are there waiting to take injured away from that facility, but they are doing treatment of people right on the site or nearby at Chelsea Piers. Reports from some of the hospitals that are taking the injured. St. Vincent's Hospital here in New York, the numbers again very rough, but an estimate of over 200 that have been taken in there, 3 dead, 18 in critical condition, and the most chilling quote that you can hear, Dr. Stephen Stern there at St. Vincent's Hospital quoted as saying, hundreds of people coming in have been burned from head to toe. Bellevue Hospital reporting more than 100 patients brought in, 2 dead. Beth Israel reporting earlier that 70 patients had been brought in. There are some estimates from hospitals in Virginia near the Pentagon of dozens of people having been brought in there. And I guess the heartening note in all this, hospitals around New York that are not in the immediate vicinity of the World Trade Centers, people saying hundreds of donors are reportedly lined up to give blood outside Beth Israel Medical Center and some others here in New York City. And what I guess is a precursor of what is going to be the kinds of terrible news that we're going to get over the next few days, a spokesman at the medical examiner's office in New York City, the coroner's office, says that for now all of the bodies that are being brought in, dead bodies, will go to the medical examiner's office on First Avenue here in New York. They say they have room for several hundred bodies, and they are making room for more space since they anticipate more bodies will be brought in. One other note to mention, at 4:30 this afternoon Eastern Time, the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, says that it has activated all 10 of FEMA's regional headquarters around the country, including those on the East Coast and then all the way west as far as San Francisco and the state of Washington. They have activated all of those regional headquarters, activated the Federal Response Plan, which FEMA says brings together 28 federal agencies and the American Red Cross, and 12 urban search and rescue teams are being dispatched. 8 of them are being sent here to New York and 4 to Washington, all deployed to search for victims of what has happened today. And the Health and Human Services Department has activated a national medical emergency system. It's really an unprecedented move, but it could dispatch nearly 7,000 volunteer doctors, nurses, pharmacists, other medical staff to areas that have been affected by today's attacks. So that brings you up somewhat to date on what's being done in terms of those who have been injured and provisions now being made for those who've been killed today. Peter?
Thank you, Charlie, very much. Just to try to keep the sort of sense or the proportion of casualties into some kind of in some kind of perspective. The gentleman with whom we've just been talking, who worked in a law firm in the Northern Tower, said that after the first aircraft hit in that tower, which is 8:48 Eastern Time. This is one of those "where were you when" moments I'm just utterly convinced will be that way in historical terms. Where were you when the first aircraft and then the second aircraft crashed or were crashed into the Twin Trade Towers in New York City on this day, the 11th of the month. And there's a timeline. If it's 8 hours now since this happened, and Mayor Giuliani speaks just a few minutes ago, they know of 2,100 people injured, and you see the pictures that the young man brought us from the absolute bottom, ground zero location, where the tower not only crashed on itself, but then crashed down into the ground. There wasn't a sound there except the sound of flames licking up from underground, and there was no sign of any person. And we know, because we've said it many times, that the fire department and the police department were going inwards, not outwards, when all of this happened. It's just absolutely impossible to get a grasp on. I'm very interested in the gentleman we spoke to a little while ago from the law firm, Tom, I've probably forgotten his last name. Say it out loud. Thank you, Tom Humphreys. Tom Humphreys, who said that it was his impression, at least in his building, in the North Tower, that a lot of people got out of that or had not arrived at work because it was, as he said, by New York standards, just a little earlier than people were accustomed. But when this young man, Mr. Savi, brought us his video that he'd taken, just got on his motorbike up and then walked in to this scene on the ground, it is to realize that everybody's being kept, as Bill Lakemore subsequently confirmed for us, being kept at a distance from this at the side. And that's what's left on the left of the facade of the North Tower. ABC's Bob Jamieson is downtown now. And Bob, we're looking at the pictures that have been brought to us by this young producer of a magazine. Can you just talk in general terms as you like?
Well, generally speaking, Peter, as the smoke blows back and forth and for a moment or two doesn't obscure both of the two World Trade Center buildings, you see so little. It's a tremendously eerie feeling to be in Lower Manhattan, looking down toward the tip of the island and seeing very few people, no traffic, the smoke continuing to billow from these buildings, and nothing where there were once these two landmarks that drew everyone's attention, whether you drove or flew or came to New York by boat. But Peter, there is a new concern, according to authorities, at this moment here in Lower Manhattan, and that is the growing fear that another building in the World Trade Center complex, which was not struck by an airplane, is in danger of collapsing. That is number 7 World Trade Center, somewhat shorter, with somewhat fewer stories than numbers 1 and 2. There is a fire burning vigorously in the lower floors of that building, threatening the foundation. And the building was already damaged some 6 hours ago now when the North Tower collapsed, and part of that